Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm gonna explain about definition of language variation. Uh, we have to know what is variation. Is a characteristic of language, and there is more than one way of saying the same thing. Speakers may vary pronunciations like accents, vary word choice, lexicon, or morphology and syntax, like sometimes called grammar. But while the diversity of variation is great, there seems to be boundaries of variation. Speakers do not generally make drastic alternation in sentence word order or use novel sounds that are completely foreign to the language being spoken. Everyone speaks at least one language, and probably most people in the world speak more than one. Even Americans, most of whom speak only English, usually know more than one dialect. Certainly, no one talks exactly the same way at all times. You are unlikely to speak to your past in the style or vocabulary that you use in talking to the idiot who just rammed your car from behind. All dialects start with the same systems, and their partly independent histories leave different parts of parents intact, and you are unlikely to speak to your past in the style or vocabulary that you use in talking to the idiot who just rammed your car from behind. All dialects start with the same systems, and their partly independent histories leave different parts of parents intact, and this gives rise to some of the most persistent myths about language, such as the claim that some of the most present myths about language. And yeah, so we move to example and observation. And first is language. Linguistic variation is central to the study of language use. In fact, it is impossible to study the language forms is natural text without being confronted with the issues of language variability. Next, linguistic variation and sociolinguistic variations. There are two types of language variation, like linguistic and sociolinguistic. With linguistic variations, the alternation between elements is categorically constrained by the linguistic context in which they occur. With sociolinguistic variations, speakers can choose between elements in the same linguistic context hand. With sociolinguistic variations, speakers can choose between elements in the same linguistic context hand. Hence, the alternation is probabilistic. Furthermore, the probability of one form being chosen over another is also affected in a probabilistic way by a range of extralinguistic factors like the degree of informality to topic under discussions, the social status of the speaker and the interlocutor, the setting in which communication takes. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, guys, I will continue the presentation from Kavita. Next, the material dialect variation. A dialect is variation in grammar and vocabulary in addition to sound variation. For example, if one person utters the sentence, John is a farmer, and others say this, the same text is pronounced the word farmer as fahmu. The difference is one of action. Next, types of variation. Types of variation. Number one, linguistic variation. linguistic variation, the introduction of the quantitative approach to language description has relevant important patterns of linguistic behavior which here previously invisible. Then, uh, factor for language variation. Number one, context. The context in which a speaker or reader expressed ID has an influence on the language variation or choice of word expression. Then speaker age can determine how how English learns express themselves and US a teacher and is easily see the difference in language variation if you teach a class of children opposed to a class of adult learners. Uh, as the level begin his teenage years and become an adult. This is not just because it's a in college. This is also because Digo is no more mature and he spontaneously feel more comfortable using more formal language. Next material is national language or official language. National or official, the official language of a country recorded and adopted by its government and spoken and written by majority of people in country. Uh, then So dialect is pretty real to you as it involves different in pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. Region dialect. A region dialect is not distinct language but a breed of language spoken in particular area of a country. Uh, Number two, minority dialect. Sometimes members of a particular minority group have their own uh, variety which they use as a marker of identity, usually alongside a standard variety. Uh, then social dialect uh, or socialect is a social with particular class. Then individual dialect. It also now in dialect is your individual living is a society. All people of country of use this dialect in their speak. Okay, I think that's all about my presentation. Thank you for attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.